get on to our guest today, Stacy. We welcomed you already this morning, but let's learn a little bit about who you are and what you do in the HR field. I know you're not new to the field and got lots of good experiences. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure. So I'm Stacy Spradling, and currently I'm in my what I call my retirement job. So I'm the Chief HR Officer at Holmes, which is a nonprofit organization. But I spent years traveling the globe with very large contact center organizations. So organizations 50,000 employees or more. And if you know anything about the contact center industry, you know that it's a high volume recruiting industry. We were putting sometimes 50 people a week into the business, and turnover could be anywhere between 200 and 300% annually. So,
oh my goodness,
cut my teeth in that industry and really developed this curiosity about recruiting, branding, and the candidate experience.
To do that, you have to love recruiting and branding.
You do. You have to, I always said that my job was putting people to work, and I really meant that. That was something that I took a lot of pride in. So we had call centers in little towns where people needed work. So we were able to put them to work, which was very cool.
All right. So one little side note. So you must be from St. Louis. You have a dog named Yachty. So anyone that's not maybe familiar with baseball and or St. Louis wouldn't understand that reference. So Yadier Molina, is that who your dog is named after?
My dog is named after Yadier Molina, a 13-year-old Chihuahua that joined our family about the time my son was playing select baseball. And my son was a catcher, so Yachty was all the rage in our house.
Oh yeah, you know what? That is the perfect, either a little Chihuahua or a pit bull. One of those two would describe Molina to me. So that's a perfect description of that. I did notice in our chat poll, and I want to get to that in a moment, but for those of you that put into the word cloud, did you answer that question from the perspective of your experience or the experience of the candidate? Maybe you can share with us in the chat how you answered those questions, because they were starting to draw my interest. But before we look at that together, Stacy, tell me a little bit about Holmes, because they're a great story and they do some amazing things to help human beings live a better life. But tell our listeners what is and who is Holmes.
Sure. So Emmaus Holmes is in St. Charles, but we serve 5 counties, about 200 clients. And those clients are adults with developmental disabilities who need some sort of support throughout the day. And so we have about 680 to 700 employees that support those wonderful human beings and allow them to live in their own home and integrate in their community. And what I say is, we do work that matters because we're leaving a legacy both for our clients and their guardians as our clients go on and live their very best, most independent and life in a community that will also be better because that person's living in that community.
So that's St. Charles, Missouri.
St. Charles, Missouri. Yes, I'm sorry. Go Battlehawks. We talked about the Cardinals, but I got to say I almost wear my blue wig because our Battlehawks, they're in the playoffs this weekend, so
that's a big deal for us. That's right. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So St. Charles, Missouri, 700 or so employees. The name Holmes, you're not a home builder.
We are not a home builder. We are supporting adults with developmental disabilities in their own homes.
Okay.
And why do we say homes? I'm not sure. We usually just call ourselves Emmaus.
Emmaus, absolutely. And I know enough to know that without Emmaus, our community would struggle even more so. And it's a great cause. I've had a chance to meet you and your staff, and they are passionately involved with serving your customers. And you bring this aspect of recruiting and, a tremendous experience of recruiting. And you look at the customer as your candidate slightly different, or excuse me, let me start over. You look at your candidates as customers, and that's a different perspective than we would normally think of as applicants or job potential candidates. Tell us, where did that originate from and what are you doing? And give us some insight to how that's working for you.
So let me start by saying that it's aspirational for us. We're not doing it all perfectly. But where it really started was in my years of travel throughout the globe. I gained a lot of airline status. When you're traveling 85% of the time, you have the luxury of earning status. And through that status, I became a member of just about every travel lounge that there is out there. And
Yeah.
I always was remaining curious, right? Because I was in this high volume recruiting world. And I began to think about how I feel when I walk into an American Express Centurion lounge. And why do I feel so special when I walk in there? Because really, it's just a room that they've logoed up. But then I began to think about all of the places where I have really great customer experiences. And through that exploration, I realized we're treating the candidate pretty poorly and started to kind of think as the candidate as our customer instead of a candidate. And just that in and of itself will change the way you think. If you just change that word, candidate to customer, it automatically takes your thinking someplace differently. But as I started to think about what makes a great customer experience, I thought about kind of some key points. They know their products and services really well. They're experts on their products and services, and they might teach me something. You know, if it's an electronics brand, maybe they're teaching me a tip or a trick. They're making my life easier somehow. And they know when I call them, they know the product very well. They're giving me their undivided attention. This is where the Centurion Lounge comes in. It's like, I feel kind of special. I get to sit in this comfy chair back here in the quiet where everybody else is out there by the gate and there's no seats and that sort of thing.
That's where I'm at. I'm out there
Yes.
by the gate, just so you know.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I am
Trying
too
to find a
now.
place to plug in. Yeah.
Working those plugins. And that I feel like a VIP, like there's some sort of luxury or there's some sort of special treatment. So take all of those things and now think about someone who's coming to your organization is going to walk right under your logo to come through an interview. And I would bet, so I don't know about you, but there was a time when the word of the year was differentiate. We all needed to
Oh, yeah.
differentiate. It was the buzzword. Kind of like thrive or employee engagement, all those things, you know, but differentiate was
Differentiate
a
or
word.
die. Yeah.
Yes. And I started thinking about, and I'd ask the audience here to think about, okay, what's a typical candidate experience? Unless you are really doing it well, I can bet the candidate gets a phone call, they schedule an interview after some sort of a pre-screen, they walk in the door on the day of their interview, a receptionist or somebody meets them, has them sit down. They sit and squirm for a while day-to-day activity is going on. Somebody comes, shakes their hand. They follow that person to an office. They sit across the desk. The person with the desk has their notes laid out and they have a pen and they have notebook. And the person who's being interviewed is sitting in a chair with nowhere to write. Even if they did bring a notebook, interview gets over. We tell you, we'll talk to you later. Thanks a bunch. And we walk them to the door. That right. I would bet is the typical candidate experience for most organizations. So take every step of that.
The only thing I would add to that is often when you're sitting in the lobby or the lounge and you're kind of waiting for it, usually you're already off schedule, right? You're waiting for somebody, they're finishing up their last meeting, they're trying to run a copy of your resume that they haven't really prepared for just yet. They're trying to decide where they're going to meet at. And so therefore you're already 15, 20 minutes off schedule. That's
Absolutely.
also very common. Yes.
I'm
just talking, because I like what you're saying. One thing that AIM does, many people don't know, is we do like secret Santa or secret shoppers, so that when, you know, sometimes we will pose as candidates and we apply for jobs and no one else in the organization will know. And we go right through the cycle of interviewing so that we can then give that organization feedback on what the candidate experience was. And one of the more common experiences is we were way off schedule. We didn't keep time. We sat in the lobby. It wasn't well communicated. We really didn't know, blah, 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 blah. And many of the lobbies they go into today don't even have a receptionist, right? It's like you make a phone call and then you sit and you wonder. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can relate to that. Yeah.
Yes. And so take every step of that process and think about, okay, how do I differentiate part one? I called the candidate, I've scheduled their interview. Great. Is it hard to differentiate that process? No, it's not. You could take one little piece of that and say, you know what? We're going to tell you exactly what the interview is going to look like. We're going to even coach you. We're going to root for you. We're not rooting against you. We're not trying to be mysterious here. You don't need to demystify anything. Let us demystify it all for you. Then when they arrive, you could actually take the time to have a room set up, your own Centurion Lounge.
Yeah.
Oh,
clever.
You know,
Very
where
clever.
they are ushered into there. And then I'm going to use something I learned at AIM. You could have a computer in there with a chat bot. And you could say, ask this computer anything you want while you wait. Ask them how your interview is going to go, something about the company, about our benefits, about pay. Ask it anything. Gives them something to do, right? I'm going to back up for a minute. Maybe the recruiter at the end, when they schedule the interview, says, hey, by the way, you know, would you prefer to have Cheez-Its or Doritos? Do you like water or Dr. Pepper? And then when they show up in that room, there's a little placard that says, we heard you liked Dr. Pepper. Here you go.
Nice. Very nice.
Special, luxurious treatment. Everybody needs a Dr. Pepper before their interview. I'm not a soda drinker, but I heard that. Maybe
Diet
in
Dr.
that
Pepper,
room.
please. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Diet Dr. Pepper. Yes. So maybe in that room, there's videos going on that show some realistic job previews. You're educating them. You're the expert. You're telling them a little bit. I'm going to go fast here, but give them a notebook. If they didn't bring one, don't hold it against them. I know so many interviewers say, well, if they wanted to take notes, they should have brought a notebook. Okay, but what's wrong with giving them a notebook and a pen? And by the way, if they're sitting across the desk from you, they may not feel compelled to put their notebook on your desk. So find some neutral space to interview them in. Give them the comfy chair.
Yeah.
Sit across from them. That's how you make that experience more like a customer experience.
You know what I don't like? Something that I do that I don't like. I always do it differently because of that. So in our boardroom, and you've seen our boardroom before. Like I sit at the head of the table, right? That's my seat, kind of like at the dinner table. You know, no one wants to sit in Phil's chair, that type of thing. And it just the way it worked out, it's never been the plan, but not an uncommon thing. Well, in an interview, if I go into that room for an interview, I sit in that same seat. And I will often ask the candidate, I go, hey, you sit right here. You're the head of the table, and then I'll sit somewhere else. And it's interesting to see their response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure.
So
for sure.
I love the idea of setting that room as you described. Let's just take a couple minutes more, Stace, and learn just a little bit more about this candidate experience.
Sure. Well, something that we talked about in one of your polls earlier was how does that experience equate to what they experience when they become your employee? And so I used to work with companies all the time in my consulting business that where we would have to kind of go through the steps of where does this become a bait and switch, and work on what that culture, somebody said culture, work on that culture matching the interview process. Now, I want to clarify something, that if you are hiring pilots or surgeons, unless you're hiring pilots, surgeons, you probably don't need a high pressure interview, right? So we're talking about making someone feel comfortable so that they will be their most authentic self, because you will learn way more about them and who they are as an employee if you're not trying to get from them the answers that they think that you're supposed to get. If you just become cozy and
you're not trying to trick them into an answer.
Yeah, just find out who they are. So I think that's important.
That's a great point. That's an excellent point.
And then another thing that I will say is, and it kind of, I have all kinds of ideas. I mean, when I come back from a conference or after I've been away kind of decompressing, I think my team kind of sighs a heavy sigh because they know I'm going to be like, can we do this and this and this? And so when I talk to companies out there, and I talk to a lot of chamber of commerce meetings, that I'm speaking at, or conferences, I say to them, having a Dr. Pepper may not work for you. You might be in a sterile environment where you can't do that. That's okay. Take that idea of making someone feel special. Maybe it's that they walk away with a baggie that the receptionist gives them that has their, hey, you did great on your interview. Here's a little treat for you on the drive home. You can modify this based upon the company that you are and based upon your culture. But think about all those things. I just encourage people as you're out and about, and when you're the customer and you want to be treated special,
Yeah.
what are the things that they're doing? And it's interesting because one of the things I have in my notes is there may be times I actually made some notes of, well, when would this not apply? When you're fully remote, when you're doing panel interviews.
I was just going to ask you a question. We have a question from our chat group here, and they're asking about any ideas for someone who's fully remote.
So it's going to depend. I assume, based upon this question, that the interviews are all remote, the candidates are all remote. There's never a time, at least maybe even when they become an employee, where there is face-to-face time with the company.
Okay.
So again, in thinking about those things, what I might do with a candidate is, if I'm fully remote, to make them feel a little more special or to make them feel comfortable, is to say, hey, I'm going to set you up with my IT person or a personal representative so that you can set up all your tech and test your video and your mic before the interview. So that once you get on the interview, we've gone through all of the glitches that you might. And so could we schedule that a day in advance? Or I'm going to put you on with a personal representative who's going to help lead you through what a remote interview with this company might look like. So it's a pre-step. You need a resource to do that.
Right.
But I'm on the interview. Maybe this is the first time I've ever done a remote interview. I don't know whether my camera's working. I don't know whether you can hear me. So if you had, just similar to how you have with podcasts, you have this pre-time that leads them into that, might be a way for you to personalize that. Another way for you to personalize that in a remote is, if you have the time, is to send a little postcard or something in the mail. Everybody still likes to get mail. You probably aren't going to mail them a Dr. Pepper, but I
am aware of organizations that will mail a little bit of, I'll call it just a care package of information and or a Dr. Pepper included, where I am aware of companies that do that to help that remote candidate experience.
Absolutely.
Ooh, yeah. What about a gas card or something like that? A little gas card so they can pick up something on their way and it takes care of their drive to your office?
Absolutely. We used to give gas cards to candidates, $10. We really did.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. The other thing that I had heard, another idea, and then we're going to have to call it time. And Stacy, I feel like I could just talk to you for another hour on this topic. But the other thing I had heard, and someone in our staff was talking about, if we're doing a lunch and learn, but if you're doing a lunchtime interview, then you send them a gift card for DoorDash, and you let them order their lunch and say, we're going to eat lunch, so here's your gift card for DoorDash. Order what you want. Feel comfortable to eat while we're interviewing, because that's the culture and that's what they wanted to do. I thought that was a really clever idea as well, because that would be memorable, and that's something I would go talk about.
Absolutely.
So can you talk just for 30 seconds on the branding element, the benefit the company receives from that, real quick, Stace?
Sure. So here's what I will say is that a candidate is going to talk about their experience if it's really bad. And they're going to talk about their experience if it's really good. And they're probably not going to talk about it as much as if it's good, right. Good versus bad. But if you are that differentiated, and we may have to go into another segment about remote altogether, because I think that's a piece of it. But if you're so differentiated that a candidate comes in, and so what if they spend 10 minutes in your Centurion lounge, if they're absorbing all this information, enjoying their favorite snack and sitting they are going, even if you don't select them, they're going to tell your story. Like, this interview was wild. Like, I felt like the most important person. And you want to capture that candidate, by the way, even if you deselect them. I have a whole another series on how do you take the candidates that you don't select because the timing is not right, not the candidates that really shouldn't be working for you because they just don't fit or don't have the competencies, but those candidates where the timing isn't right, I don't have enough vacancies. And how do you capture them in almost like an alumni group so that they remain in your pipeline and they remain engaged with the brand? So the branding is about remaining engaged with the brand throughout the entire life cycle, not just throughout the interview process.
Yeah, excellent idea. Stacy, I can't thank you enough, one, for being a member of AIM and all the wonderful things that you and your staff are doing for the community in and around the St. Louis metropolitan area, specifically with the focus in St. Charles. But thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link aimea.org/thisweekatwork or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment, like LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you are. And you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.